All right, I hope everyone had a good lunch and a good group before that. This is another one of those really, we're even calling it deepening emotional, physical, and spiritual intimacy. It's a deeper one. And I hope to keep it interesting for you after lunch. I hope that most of you won't fall asleep during this time, but that's always the temptation after a big lunch and a long morning, which I appreciate y'all's attention. You know, what is actually intimacy? You know, we use that word pretty freely, don't we? And most of the time we don't really fully understand what that means, but I will tell you, most people understand what the lack of emotional intimacy is, and you see the results of it all the time, and maybe even within your own marriage at times. But I'm going to read you a little vignette here. Tim and Sandy have been married for almost 20 years and had 3 children. Tim's job required that he travel and entertain different customers. You already see the problem starting here, right? Sandy was the steady rock of the family who handled everything while Tim was wrong. Oh, I bet there are a few of y'all out there too. One day, out of the blue, Tim asked Sandy. I remember when he asked this question, I almost fell out of my chair, because so did she. Have you ever thought that there could be someone better out there for us? Ooh, that's a dangerous question to ask, but at least he was in good company. He knew that he could probably ask that in the context that we were sitting. Anyhow, Sandy was shocked, but Tim was serious. He had been thinking about how much better his life might be if it were different. He wondered what it would be like to be single again. Dangerous territory. What if he made different choices earlier in his life? So Tim had fallen victim to the false belief that there is better than here. So when people lack emotional intimacy, they start thinking about what ifs, is what happens, instead of what is and what do we need to do differently, because we've gotten kind of stale and maybe routine and perhaps even boring in some regards. They start looking at a different landscape. And as we said, there's no better than here most of the time, but by the time you figure that out, it's too late. So let me tell you what intimacy is not. Let's start with what it isn't, because that's important to kind of set a precedent. Okay, we'll get to this one. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's not just sex. When people talk about intimacy, they kind of use that as a nice word for let's have sex, and it's like, well, I mean that could be part of it, but fundamentally, it's not just sex. It's not just a feeling. And a lot of times people want to keep that feeling when when they've gotten routine and a little bored. It is not just having a good time all the time. I mean, let's face it, everybody understands that marriage is hard, kids are hard, work is hard, life is hard. But we don't want it to be boring, and we don't want you to kind of, to not be happy with what you have. So you have to kind of put some energy into it, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Intimacy does not just happen, all right? People think sometimes, well, we have those feelings, we have that kind of electricity, we have that, we call that infatuation too, all right? And something better and deeper takes place of that. Now, it may not have all the intensity that it initially did, but just remember, intensity doesn't always have depth, all right? So you're trading one thing for something of better quality, even though you have to kind of accept the fact that maybe it doesn't have all the electricity that it initially had. There are no shortcuts to intimacy. Oh man, isn't there be an easier way to do this? There just aren't, and it won't happen if we are defensive. Okay, if we're defensive, we're self-protective, or secretive, you're not going to experience intimacy, because what you're doing is you're deflecting those that possibility by protecting yourself. So people have to drop their guards if they want intimacy, and that is really a hard thing to do. intimacy can't overcome barriers without us purposely opening up. So that's what intimacy is not. Let's talk about what it is. Okay, I'm going to read you another vignette if you don't mind. Hope I'm not boring you with those, but here's somebody who's longing for excitement. Don and Donna had been married for 27 years. Their children were all grown and gone, and they were empty nesters. Do we have any of those in here? Yeah. Many of us have been there. It was a time for them to do things they had previously did not have the resources or the opportunity to enjoy. Donna was shocked one day when, out of the blue, Don told her he didn't love her anymore and needed time to think and reflect upon his life. Whenever I heard those things from couples, I said, oh, you want a little space. I know what that means. It doesn't mean something good either. Anyhow, at first she thought he was just having a late life crisis. And some people do that, and gave him space to try and work it out in her effort to be understanding. So she was handling it the right way. She later discovered, and here it comes, some email communication between Don and an old girlfriend from college. Don had been talking with her for months, and they had even discussed how they might move forward in their lives together. Donna had no idea that Don had been unhappy and was longing for more excitement in his life. So, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes needing intimacy or lacking intimacy can lead people to look for it in the wrong places. All right, so what is intimacy? It's feeling emotionally close to another person. It's like feeling your spouse is your best friend. All right, that's something you have to develop. Now, some people believe that or have that experience initially. A couple up here last night had the right idea. You really want your spouse to be your best friend. Y'all want to be able to talk about anything that you can. Being connected in a special way to someone. In other words, looking forward to sharing your life with that person. Wanting, thinking, anticipating, being excited about sharing something that's gone on in your day with them. That's what intimacy is. Knowing someone and being known by them, warts and all, faults and all. If you know everything about me and you still want to be with me, you must really care. I mean, that's unconditional love and acceptance, isn't it? Yeah, that's really what we're after. Intentionally opening up about our private and personal life. Some people can be married and just really not share what their private lives, what's going on in their private lives, or what their struggles are, or what their fears or anxieties are. The irony of it is your spouse already knows what they are. If you just talk about them, it will really help a lot more. Taking the risk to share those insecurities, that doesn't make you weak, it just makes you real. The doubts, the embarrassment, and like I said, our spouse already knows that they exist. They've lived enough. We've lived long enough with them, and they've lived long enough with us to know what they are. And obviously, we have so much more that they care about. And it is about forgiveness and offering repair attempts. It is because sometimes when you are able to drop your guard and own personal responsibility, you just feel closer to somebody. And it takes a little bit of emotion and it takes a little vulnerability, but that's what we need. So deepening emotional intimacy requires three simple things. I'm not saying they're simple to do, but they're three simple things. Okay, one is intentionality. All right, if you think something's missing, if you feel like something's missing, then you may want to decide, I need to do something about this. I want to be more intimate. Maybe I don't know how to be more intimate, but I want to be more intimate emotionally. I'd like for us to be closer. So it's a purposeful initiation of that. It's a declaration that, I'd like more of that with you. And here's the hard part, and is that it requires a time commitment. And most of us are so busy. I was talking with someone during the break about how he and I have spent our careers being way too overcommitted to other things to prove ourselves to ourselves. And what happens is the people that we really care the most for end up getting the short end of the stick, or they don't get as much of us as they would like to. And then we find that later in life, when people ask us, what would you do differently? We'd say, I wish I'd spent more time with my family. That's what Bear Bryant from Alabama said. When he retired, he lived 1 year, and that was one of the things he said. I wish I'd spent more time with my family, and then he died. Okay, and that's kind of the irony and the sad part of it. So, anyhow, time requirements. You can't rush. It's kind of like strength training, weight loss. You can't just hope for it, pray about it, or take a pill. Okay, it requires regular discipline every day. And I know one of the things that Dren and I have done for years, I don't even know when we started this, but it may have been at the beginning of our relationship. We do this like clockwork because we want to, because it's helpful, because the proof is in the pudding. And that is, we get up every morning, put on a pot of coffee, sit there and drink that pot of coffee. And we talk about whatever's on our minds, whatever we're doing, whatever we need to do, whatever's going on, anything that really comes to mind. And then at the end of the day, no matter how late it is, we do the same thing. We may grab a glass of wine or just sit there and just catch up without the TV on. Now, doesn't mean the TV doesn't come on eventually, but those kinds of things are invaluable. And you can't just schedule intimacy. And if you've ever had that experience with kids where you sit down with them and go, let's just talk. And they go, oh no. They don't open up when you want them to open up. You know when they open up? When you're doing something with them. You're driving along in the car and all of a sudden they lay some kind of profound kind of issue on the table and it's like, oh my goodness, really? We don't have time to talk about that. Well, that's why you have to make time to talk about those, because the opportunities present themselves when you provide the time. It's really hard to schedule in our lives of time management and overcommitments. Sometimes we miss deepening emotional intimacy. Okay. It involves implementation, actions. In other words, you do have to plan them and as best as you can. You have to make that happen. You have to ask for what you want. You have to be attentive to what the other person wants. And when we are in a rush, we don't pick up as much of what's going on with the other person as we should, as if we should. And so none of us are really good at mind reading, but if we're too busy and preoccupied, what happens is we just don't pick up on the silences or the mood changes or the little subtle things that say, I need you, but I don't know if you have time, or whether I'm ready to talk about this. Or even if we have talked about it, we may not remember to circle back around and go, hey, how's this situation going? How are you feeling about that? And that's what develops emotional intimacy. So, being intentional, being willing to spend the time, and specific actions. Now, remember when you were first dating and you're interested in getting that other person's attention and securing their interest in you? What did you do? Well, you were intentional, right? You made time for them. You you showed actions and did things that would bump you up high on the on the hierarchy of who they might show interest in. And that doesn't change in life. I know we have other things we want to do and need to do, and responsibilities that we have, but nonetheless. What actions should we take to deepen emotional intimacy? So this is a chapter in one of my books, The 4 A's of Emotional Intimacy. And it makes it real easy to remember. But if you really want to deepen your emotional closeness to your spouse, these are the things you have to do. All right? Pay attention. Surprise, surprise. So it's attention, affirmation, affection, and a positive attitude. So we need to pay attention to our spouse more than anyone, even though our kids may demand it and we should give them whatever they need. Whatever our spouse needs, we need to figure out how to give them that attention. Because, even if we have to stop, listen, write it down, whatever it is that it takes to remember things. And I was talking to Ken during the break, and here's the problem with it, we guys. Unfortunately, most of us are not good listeners. And me included, and I'm a paid listener. Used to be. But I'm not a very good listener when it comes to being, at home. And, my wife has caught me any number of times feigning attention when I really didn't remember what it is that she told me, and then I'm busted. But that is part of being a male, but it doesn't mean that we have to accept that. So when, when somebody's paying attention to you, and when they are paying attention to you, you really feel cared about and important, right? And when they're not paying attention to you, you don't feel very important to them, right? You feel like you're sharing them with something else. So anyhow, guys, we can all do better than that, better at that. I'm not putting you down or anything, because I share the same challenge. But that is a challenge that we have. Klein and I had one time, he paid incredible attention to his work. He was really good at it too. I mean, he was on it all the time and very successful in what he did. And his wife felt ignored, and she made overtures toward getting his attention for the longest time. And finally, somebody else started paying attention to her and made her really feel special and caused her to question whether or not this is where she needed to be. And so she started sneaking around on him with this other person that was making her feel good about herself. And when this guy came into my office, he said, "My wife is seeing somebody else, and I've got to figure out who it is and why. And I've got her tracked on the phone, and I've been managing and monitoring this for the last few weeks, and you've got to help me kind of, stop this." And it's like, you're really pretty good at tracking her, but you really weren't very good at paying attention to her. Maybe that's the angle you ought to take, rather than smothering her with trying to force her to be accountable. Anyhow, so Dr. John Gottman is a marriage research scientist who, over 20 years, across the country, had all these research projects going with marriage couples, and actually did one when I was working at the mental health center years ago. He did one there. So one of my colleagues was responsible for seeing couples and doing the particular study he was doing. But anyhow, what he found, he did a number of them. One of these studies had to do with attention. So what he found out is that couples who divorced only responded 1/3 of the time to their spouse's emotional bids for attention. And when I say emotional bids for attention, is looking each other in the eyes, talking with one another, responding when the other person comes into the room, showing interest in them, remembering things. And they found out that the people who stayed married responded to their spouse's bids for emotional attention 87% of the time, almost 3 times more. They paid attention to them, which is really what everybody needs to feel important. The second A is affirmation. And that's with words and actions. It's, adoration, acts of kindness. Proverbs 15:4 says, "The tongue that brings healing is a tree of life." So the interesting thing is that many of you are familiar with the 5 languages of love, right? And I've given that test I don't know how many times. And different people respond different ways about what their 2 top languages of love are. But here's an observation, all right? For men, what I found is the 2 things they seem to gravitate most toward are words of affirmation. That's that respect issue, okay, which is affirmation. And can anybody guess what the second one is? Physical touch. Surprise, surprise. Anyhow, we'll talk about that in a minute. So, and what I found for women, the 2 things they want, interestingly enough, are very different. One of them is quality time, and the other one is acts of service, yes. So when you're doing something for your spouse, for your wife, obviously they see that as love and caring, and that you're willing to inconvenience yourself or put yourself out. Now, I was willing to kind of share with you guys what I felt like our limitation was in our relationships. Anybody have an idea what women's, at least in my experience, what women's probably toughest problem is that they don't do well, or maybe they do it real well and we just don't like it. I don't know. Anybody have an idea? Hmm? Well, they're kind of get critical. Women are more critical than men are, all right? And some of that is based on feeling shortchanged or ignored, all right? And that's what leads into the crazy cycle that I'm not going to go into since you're familiar with. But the crazy cycle basically says when a woman feels like she's not loved, and usually that means she's not ignored, then she withholds respect from her husband, all right, in order to get love. Doesn't make sense to me. Well, it does make sense to me because that's just kind of how people are. And when when men don't feel respected, what they do is they withhold love. And so in order to get respect, so you have two people who are trying to make the other person change. They're saying, I'm not going to do this until you do this. And guess what happens? Well, both people end up unhappy. But nonetheless, we'll move on from there. I wanted to share with you that some of these handouts, I've given you 3 handouts here that we just don't have time to go through. But you can take those with you. And I will tell you, I used to use these in my practice all the time, and they're incredibly valuable, and you'll just have to determine that for yourself. But the one I'm referring to now is what we call elements of emotional intimacy. If you want to define what that is involved in emotional intimacy, all these 64 acts are a part of that. They facilitate closeness. So what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to go home, circle the ones that already happened. In your opinion, do that separately. All right, don't cheat and look at what your spouse is saying and say, oh yeah, that's right, we do that. Write that down yourselves, because these are the ones that you recognize as acts of intimacy, emotional intimacy, elements of emotional intimacy, if you will. Then go, as you're going through it, check the ones you wish you had in your relationship. Both of you do that, okay? And then exchange that, and you may find that there are some things that he or she has been wanting that you just weren't aware of. And to know that what that is gives you, it gives you a great roadmap toward batting 1,000, if you will. I mean, doing better. I mean, it's a cheat sheet is what I'm giving you here. So anyhow, if you want more of that, please fill that out and don't shortchange yourself by throwing that somewhere else and not following through with it. It's a valuable tool, and people often come back saying, wow, this has really enriched our relationship a whole lot. Okay, so the next A is affection. And I'm not talking about PDA. I'm not talking about young couples hanging all over each other. I'm talking about, that's not really where we are. Most of us are way past all that. I'm talking about ways you affirm with acts of physical acts of touch each other. I mean, sometimes touch says more than words can say, and sometimes we guys aren't really that good at saying what we say. But man, we can really communicate some things that maybe we can't articulate that way, as can women, of course, as well. So I've also given you another test to take with you, and I hope you will take the time to answer that through. And basically it says, please check the specific rituals of affection that you wish occurred more in your relationship. Now, I've just given a list of what I could come up with, and you may want to add something else to it if you'd like. But that kind of affection is invaluable and very affirming and very attentive at the same time. The last one is positive attitude. So that's celebrating good times. It's not dwelling on the negative. It's defaulting to the faith, hope, and love mode, and not being cynical or doubtful. It is giving the benefit of the doubt over assuming the worst. It's being in the moment versus the future all the time and planning for what's going to happen or dwelling on the past of what has happened. It's being optimistic. Now, I have a friend who, he's Mr. Positive, and I really appreciate that, and he's married to Eeyore. Anybody know who Eeyore is? Okay. Anyhow, she does not look like a donkey, but she sure does sound like she focuses on what's wrong all the time. Now, guess what kind of wife their son married. Yep, that's right, Eeyore, too. So the way we are can influence the choices our kids make because it feels like home, even though it may not be a home they want to be in. So the whole idea is if we know we need to make some changes, let's make some changes. Okay, I'm getting close to the end here. Let's talk about deepening physical intimacy. Okay? So what most people want to know is how much sex is normal? Well, we're going to talk about that today, and it may be different for everybody. So factors, let me just qualify this because it's important that we do this. I'm going to talk about what it used to be 20 or 30 years ago and what it is now because it is different. And that may not necessarily be what you wanted to hear. 20 or 30 years ago, how many hours a week were we working? 40. How many hours are we working now? 50, 60. I mean, it's unbelievable. And what has happened is back in the day when before all this occurred, young couples, mid-range couples were probably having sex 2 or 3 times a week if they were lucky. Okay, because they had the time, there wasn't as much stress. Now, that's not always the case, and the factors that influence one way or the other are things like age, stress, schedules, health, work, kids. So your particular situation may alter that. So I'm not in any way bringing this up to say, your sex life isn't adequate. That's not my point at all. My point is it's all situational. And people want to know what's normal, and it's like, well, you can't really answer that question because it's a contextual kind of question. So there was a 2019 study, and I didn't put that on here. It's a 2019 study that interviewed a number of married couples, and they found that 47% of those couples, and I have no idea how old they were or what the age range was, found that most couples back in 2019 were having sex 1 time or less a week. Okay. Now there was this study that I'm about to show you was done in 2021. The sample survey was 30,000 Americans. And you might be a little surprised about the percentages here. So what it basically suggests that 5% of that 30,000 person sample had sex 4 times or more a week. I'm guessing they were underemployed, very young people, right? I could be wrong, but it's possible that is the case. 16% had sex 2 to 3 times a week. 25%, which is, you're starting to look at this bell curve, what is the normal kind of average amount of sex for people in general if you take in the total population. It's about 25% is about 1 time a week. That may or may not be true. If it's more for you, good for you. 19% had sex 2 to 3 times a month. 17 had 1 time a month. 7 had 1 or twice a year, I guess whether they needed it or not. And 10% never had it. Okay. Now, I had a client once who I've recently had contact with again, and they came in and they were, I think, having sex 4 to 6 times a year at the time. And guess who was the unhappiest? No, the wife. The wife was the unhappiest. The guy, he just wasn't into it. It's like, what planet are you from? I don't know. But anyhow, the point of the matter is, whatever their issues were didn't ever really get resolved, unfortunately. So when the kids left, she did too, unfortunately. And that never changed. Their emotional and sexual intimacy, just never improved. And, you can't help everybody. You got to try to help them see what the path is, and people have to take that or not. Then I had another couple come in one time, and they had sex every day. I mean, he was really proud of it. It was like, how do you do that? Do you have a job? Anyhow, and he was like almost arrogant about it. And I asked his wife how she felt about it, and she didn't want to talk about it. So clearly she was consenting openly in her actions, but that's not really what she wanted because he was having sex for himself, not for them. Now, I don't ever know what happened to them, but I do know that she had I could tell that she had a lot of resentment stored up, and he may have experienced that at some point during their relationship. But because he didn't really think there was a problem anyhow. They dropped out early. But, you know, you can lead somebody to the water, but you can't make them drink it. All right, let's see. What's a normal amount of sex? If you are both satisfied with the number of times you have sex in your marriage, that's the right amount of sex. Okay? I mean, it seems like a simple answer, but it is true. Satisfaction and interpersonal connection are more important than the frequency. We guys get into the frequency thing, okay? If we don't have it at the rate we think it should be, then, you know, somehow we think something's wrong or we're being shortchanged but the reality of it is that's the satisfaction in the interpersonal connection thing that really is more important than anybody. So if you want more frequency, if that's really what's important to you, you have to increase a few things, okay? And decrease one. You have to increase your quality time together. Remember that love language thing that women like? That quality time? They have to have more of that. And you have to increase your romance and love overtures. Now that may be conversation, attention, it could be affection, and you have to decrease your stress. And sometimes the third one is not possible just because of the lifestyle that you have. Okay, if you want to just improve your sex life already, you have to do a couple of similar but other things. You have to talk about it. A lot of times people don't talk about it. They may argue about it, but they don't really talk about it. They need to compromise on when, what, how much, and that's hard for people to talk about it, you know. But that is exactly what has to happen. Compromise has to happen. And then you have to make the time for lovemaking and even quickies, for that matter. Okay, so I want you to, I don't know if I put this on here. Yeah, major difference between the sexes. You may or may not have noticed this. Women generally need to feel love in order to make love. Men generally need to make love to feel love. That's a conundrum, isn't it? What do we do about that? Well, well, she just needs to understand what I need. Well, the point is, if we know that she needs to make love, if she needs to feel love, then why don't we make her feel loved? And if she knows he needs to make love to feel love, that's the problem with men. Sometimes we just have to have the closeness in order to be close. Now, men, if when you do get that, then you're off doing something else, off and gone, that's not going to reinforce that happening in the future. So the idea is that you try to meet the other person where they are. That's really what that's all about. Okay. There's another, gosh, I'm running over here. There's another handout that I've given you that I really think would be helpful in your re-romance. It's called Re-Romancing Intimacy and God in Our Marriage. And it's 3 questions, and you could put multiple answers on it, but I think it would be worth your while. I did not come up with this. Harville Hendricks in Getting the Love You Want came up with this, but they're great questions for re-romancing and cultivating more emotional and physical intimacy in your relationship. And it basically says, what you do for me already that makes me happy. I feel loved and cared about you, when you, and writing those things down. It's always nice to have that reminder in our lives from our spouse. What is it that is so important to us? The second one is what you used to do for me that no longer occurs. In other words, I used to feel loved and cared for about you. I cared about when you, and you hopefully request those things again, because sometimes we just don't do some of the things we used to do. We don't have those talks or those date nights or those special times, that celebrations that really make you feel loved. And the third one, of course, is what I wish that we could do that we've never done before. Oh, then your imagination starts going then. But that's an important one to do. But again, it's one of those things where you sit down to give some thought to it, give multiple answers, exchange that. I guarantee you, you won't be disappointed if you spend the time doing that. Okay. Deepening our spiritual intimacy with God. You know, we have a lot of books written about that and a lot of really great ethereal things, very spiritual things that people write about. But frankly, it really boils down to four basic kinds of things that really require us to consistently participate in that. And that is praying without ceasing, praying in the morning, praying in the evening, praying in our car, praying on our knees, praying together, praying about things that are going on. That's your conversation with God. And, you know, it's like your conversation with your spouse. If you don't have it every day throughout the day, then it's going to be really, really important to get close to God. Reading and hearing God's word daily. Whatever you're reading, scriptures, devotionals, stories, anything that helps you understand the mind of God a lot more and helps us align our values and our attitudes with what God is wanting for us. Those kinds of things you cannot substitute. You can't shortcut them. I mean, that's emotional intimacy with God. And we've been talking about how to do that with each other. It's the same thing. I mean, it's the same kind of process. Becoming more like Christ. You know, if we can come to church all we want to, we can read the scriptures, but if we're not evolving into becoming more Christ-like and changing in a good way the person that we're becoming, we've kind of missed the point, all right? This is supposed to change us. This is supposed to make us better than we are. And, you know, hopefully no one stops growing in their life. Hopefully no one wants to stop growing. In other words, would you work for a job when they said, this is all we're going to pay you for the rest of your life? I hope you enjoy it. Have fun with it. No. And we want to have promotions. We want to make more money. So in no other area in our life would we be content with just status quo. So the same should be true in our personal development as an individual in our relationship with God. And last but not least, sharing our faith with words, but more importantly, with our genuine personal example. You know, I'd really rather see a sermon than hear one any day. All right, and I want to hear them too because they're encouraging. But the point of the matter is, when you're becoming a different person, a better person, then what happens is people want to know what you have. I mean, you can ask people all day, and you should. I mean, within reason. I don't mean pester and give them a hard time and make yourself a nuisance. But reaching out to people is really what we're all about. But being somebody that another person is interested in and wants to know. Wants to be your friend, wants to know why you're so happy all the time, wants to know why you are how you are, is really what this is all about, us evolving. And that's really, I think, when you get to the end of that with book, you're going to find that's really what he's talking about, is that cementing that relationship with God in that way and becoming that person. So moving on to deepening our spiritual relationship with our marriage, it's the same thing. And I'm just going to skip through this because I think I've really kind of made the points. It's attending regular church activities. People who call themselves Christians but don't go to church and don't involve themselves in activities and aren't in spiritually related activities, you know what their divorce rate is? The same as the general population, even if they identify as a Christian. You know what the divorce rate is with people who call themselves Christians and are involved and committed and attend regularly and do everything they can to grow? It's 35 to 50% less than the population. It's an important statistic to know. So if you want to get close in your marriage, share that. I mean, it's really hard if your partner doesn't share that, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep on doing that kind of thing because you never know when they're going to turn around or when they're going to have the same interests that you do. But the things that are important here, in the way I view this, and this is just my opinion about that, I think we have a circle of influence, people who are in our circle, our family, our friends, our kids, our neighbors, the people we associate with or maybe our business, that we have direct connection with all the time, okay? And then we have our circle of concern, everything outside of that, world peace, what's going on in Ukraine. Not that we shouldn't be involved with those, but guess where we have the most influence? The people around us. And it's a shame when you see people focusing on all those other things and what's in the circle of influence is, in shambles. So if you want to make a difference, I mean, we've done this in our neighborhood. It took us 10 years to get one couple to church, but they're coming now. But we were just friends. We spent time with them. We enjoyed, enjoyed things that they enjoyed. We got to know them. And remember, this is a long haul. You got to have the long view of this whole thing. And these are things that if you do together, they'll bring you close together as a couple because you have the same mission and you share things. You share what you're learning. You share what you're reading. You share what's going on with your friends. You share that it just brings you together in a way that nothing else really will. And that spiritual intimacy is priceless, and a lot of people don't have it. And again, there are no shortcuts, but it has to be a lifestyle. It can't just be dictated to you or something you ought to do, and we ought to get around to it. It's got to be who you are. That's really what it boils down to. Anyhow, I know we're running out of time, and I could say more, except I don't want to take away from your time in the group. So we have some breakout questions for you. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Yes, there they are. What is something I could do to make you feel more emotionally close to me? Okay, this is what you're asking your spouse. What is something I could do to make you want to be more physically close to me? Because there may be some things that you're doing that are not wanting to make the other person physically close to you. And what is something I could do to make us more spiritually connected to each other and to God? So that is what we're going to do next. And I don't know how much time we have for that, but about 30 minutes. Okay, so let's break out and do that, and we'll then move on to the next part of the program. Thank you.